welcome to Revive and Rise. I'm your host, Melody Parrish, and I want to thank you so much for joining us today. In today's episode, I'm going to continue to share stories about my brother and the life lessons that I learned from those stories when looking back. Most of them, or some of them, are from when I was a child, so I had limited amount of ability to think deeply about these things, but when I reflect later in life on these specific stories, it makes me think of different lessons that I could learn from the stories. I also want to thank you for your patience with me as I do this. The pain is real, the grief is real, and sometimes it's greater than I expect. So, just like all grief. Today, I'm going to be talking about maybe the first time that I really can put a finger on my feeling of guilt and learning about guilt. I've later learned a lot about guilt and shame, which I'll share with you after I tell you this story. I think I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade. I don't know exactly what age that would be, but and I had my best friend Lacey over this particular time. Lacey came over to my house pretty regularly, or I would go over to hers. We would hang out together at school a lot, and when we went to youth choir at church, we would hang out a lot then as well. And this particular day, I don't remember exactly what my brother did. But I'm sure it was just, I do know that it was a teasing of some sort, and I just feel like it was probably a teasing like siblings do, a sort of picking, if you'll want to call it that. But, he would tease frequently just because I was always around, right? I was always following him around, and I'm sure it got really annoying. So he would tease me, and this particular day, me and Lacey had enough. He had just pushed us over above our limits. And so this particular day, we decided that we were going to teach him a lesson. If he was going to tease us like that, we were going to make sure that he understood that was wrong. We were going to give him a payback. And, at that age, you don't really understand those concepts or understand what payback is. But we felt like the proper payback would be to play a bunch of pranks on him. So we went into, I'm not sure how we did this, but we went into the bathroom and we put Kool-Aid in the shower head. We put green Kool-Aid there so that when the shower cut on, green water would come out, and we were certain that would dye his hair green. My brother had dark brown hair, so I don't know if even the green would have shown up. But in our minds, green Kool-Aid would dye whatever you had available. We also, we went into his room. I'm not sure where he was at that moment. We went into his room and we went into his underwear drawer and we glued his underwear together. And then we also went into the bathroom and got my parents' shaving cream. And I don't remember if it was my mom's or my dad's. But we put it in his cologne and we put it in his pillow. And then we got some pepper. And I'm not sure what this was supposed to do. I think in our young minds it was going to burn his feet, but we put it in his shoes, pepper in his shoes. We also glued, he had an entertainment system, like a piece of furniture that had a cabinet, and we glued that shut as well. And I don't remember anything else we did, but I know there were a couple more things, more pranks that we did to him. And when we got done, we were like, when he finds all this, he's going to know that he messed with the wrong people. And we were so proud of ourselves. I remember being so proud that I had done that and that this was going to make him stop teasing me now. He was going to just quit teasing me because now he knew what would happen if he did it again. And my friend Lacey, she went home to her house, and, you know, the day went on, and then my brother came in, and he went to his room. And, I mean, everything was pretty much hidden in a way, so it's not like he was going to notice it exactly at that moment. But when he went in, I remember the feeling of being just covered with guilt to the point where it was welling up inside of me. That this was my brother. I thought of him as my best friend. I've always thought of him as my best friend. And I had done this to him. And it didn't matter to me what he did to me. The fact was that I did this to him. And I was no longer proud. I was ashamed, and I couldn't believe that I decided to do that. That was my retaliation to him simply teasing me. And I think at that point, I kind of understood that the teasing wasn't as bad as I thought it was at the time. The teasing didn't have the detrimental effect that I thought it did at the time that it was happening. And I realized that I was okay. I could survive the teasing, that it really wasn't a big deal. And I remember going to my parents, and I said, I need to tell you something. I was probably not quite up to their waist as far as being as as my height. So, I couldn't really get their attention unless I screamed, and I didn't want to scream. So I kind of beat my mom on her thigh, and she didn't really pay me attention because she was busy doing something, I don't remember. And when she finished what she did, I said, listen to me, I've got to tell you something. So I just kind of grabbed her hand and started to pull her back to my brother's room. And my dad came to see what the commotion was about. And my brother was in his room. And he had a desk with a chair for him to do his homework and his studies on. So because of my height, I climbed up in the chair and I just started yelling, listen to me, listen to me. And by that point, I was crying because I was so upset with myself. And I said, I've done something terrible. I've just done something terrible. And everybody, because I started yelling, everybody turned to look at me and see what I was yelling about and why. And then they saw me crying, so they wanted to know why I was crying. And so I began to show them everything that I had done. Everything. I showed them my brother's pillow. I showed him the shoes. I showed him his underwear, his cologne. And every time I did something or I showed them something, he got madder. He got more angry, and he would just be like, what are you doing? Why did you do that? Oh my God, I can't believe you did that. Da, 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 da. And so then, I was just crying and sobbing by that point, and I was just filled with guilt. And I just said, I told my parents, I said, I need to be punished. I need to be punished for doing this. And I looked at them wanting to know my punishment, for doing this terrible thing. And I remember they looked at me and they just said, no, we're not going to punish you. You've punished yourself enough. That's okay. Well, my brother was not happy. It was like, no, she needs to be punished. Something needs to happen. She can't just do this. And so that kind of kept in my mind too. And so, my parents went off to do whatever they needed to do. I don't remember. And, my brother was in his room trying to salvage whatever I had messed up. And so I walked into the bathroom, and I guess this makes sense to a child that small. I have no idea. I would think that I was old enough to know better, or maybe I just didn't know what to do, but I just felt like I needed to be punished somehow. So I put my head in the commode, and I began to flush. And I wanted to flush my head down the commode. I don't really understand it, but I remember feeling it, and I remember deciding that's what I wanted to do. That's what I needed to do to punish myself. So I started flushing and flushing and flushing. And while I was doing that, I was crying and crying. And my parents came running in there. And then they just got me. And I remember my dad just holding me and just trying to calm me down. And telling me that wasn't going to work, that wasn't going to help anything. And just trying to calm me down. And I don't remember the rest of this story, the rest of this particular story. I don't remember what happened next, and I don't remember, what I did next. That memory kind of ends with me trying to flush my head down the commode and my dad coming in there to comfort me. But what I do remember is the guilt that I felt. And that was the first time I felt guilt. And the fact that my dad came in, comforted me, and told me that me trying to punish myself was not going to help anything. That comfort made me feel better. I stopped crying, and that just made me feel better, knowing that there was somebody there, and knowing that everything was going to be okay. Knowing that I didn't have to punish myself for making a bad decision, even if I felt guilty about it. And I carried that with me for a little while as a child, but then somewhere along the way, going into adulthood, I forgot that. I forgot that simple lesson. And as I walked through life, I gathered things that didn't belong to me. I gathered things, and I gathered more guilt and more guilt and more guilt about things that I wasn't responsible for, things that I had no control over, but I felt like I did. Just like when I was a child, I just piled on that guilt. And I just kept carrying it, and it just kept getting bigger and more. And I kept internalizing that guilt that I began to have. Now, what that does is the more we internalize guilt, whether it's guilt that we deserve for things that we should not have done, or whether it's guilt that's misplaced, that we have just taken on ourselves. Both kinds of guilt. If we start to internalize that, that begins to affect our belief system about ourselves. And that guilt begins to turn into shame. Guilt tells us, I've done something bad. I've made a bad decision. I've made a bad choice. But shame tells us that I am bad. And there's such a big difference between I did something bad and I am bad. And when you start to internalize that guilt, then it begins to turn into shame. And you start to think you're bad. You start to think you as a person is bad because you've done these things, because you've made these bad decisions, or you've made these mistakes that you have gathered guilt from. A mistake is different. A mistake is something we learn from. There should not be guilt associated with a mistake. Mistakes are human. We all do it. We all make mistakes. But when you make a bad decision knowingly, that's when the guilt comes in. And that's deserved guilt because we've knowingly made a bad decision. We need to recognize that guilt, realize that we made a bad decision, but we are not a bad person. We are a good person that has made a bad decision, and we need to release that guilt, not internalize it. But I kept grabbing guilt from anywhere that was around me. And I started internalizing it, and it became shame, and it became blame, and it became such negative beliefs about myself, which led to a low self-confidence. And while all this was going on inside of me, there wasn't a person around me that ever would believe that this was going on. Not one person would have ever thought that I was wrestling with these things. And I just moved through adulthood, and I started having that small voice inside our heads that tells us, things about ourselves. I started having all of these negative cognitions that introduced themselves, and they were covered in guilt and covered in shame and covered in blame. And as I got older, I started to develop this belief system, and I started to develop these ideas about myself that were totally wrong. And now my mind knows that those ideas were totally wrong, but my heart still goes back to that time. My heart still goes back to that idea, to those ideas sometimes. My heart still goes back to those. You are bad. You are broken. You can't do these things. You're a failure. You're not good enough. You'll never amount to anything. All of these negative cognitions would stem from the guilt that I felt, the guilt that I collected that turned into shame, that also turned into blame, and that made me think that I was such a terrible person. And I don't think anybody that surrounded me, any of my friends, any of my family, anybody that just met me, I don't think they would ever call me or see me as a terrible person. But yet, I thought that I was the worst of the worst. In my mind, there was not another human being on the face of this earth that was as terrible as me. And I still find myself sometimes slipping back into those ideas and those beliefs. And I have to challenge them. I have to challenge it almost daily. And I'm still learning to do that. I'm still learning ways to do that and ideas that can battle those negative cognitions. But that's what happens. That's what happens when you just keep on holding on to the guilt and holding on to that shame and holding on to that blame. And so I began to self-sabotage my life. I began to base ideas and decisions on those negative beliefs. I began to base decisions on those false ideas, those ideas that I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't a lovable person, that I was broken. Those ideas, I based decisions on the ideas that I was so small and insignificant. I based decisions on the ideas that I didn't matter. And because of that, for a long time, I just missed opportunities that were right in front of me. I missed moments that were right in front of me because I didn't think I was good enough, because I didn't think I could do it, because I thought I was broken. There were so many other things that were going on in my mind that I made decisions and I made choices based on, that at the moment I thought was real, and at the moment I thought was true, at the moment I thought that those were the truest things in my life, only to learn later that they weren't. Only to learn later that the places that I picked up those ideas and the places that I formed those beliefs weren't true. It was just lies. Lies that I began to believe. And sometimes when I look back on where I got those beliefs and where I got those ideas, I simply don't know why I trusted them. I don't understand why I began to value their opinion more than my own. I just don't understand why. Except that I kept bringing up that guilt and then drowning in shame. And as I was drowning in shame, all I knew to do was to blame myself. And it was a constant cycle. It was a constant cycle for a long time. I've finally, over the last couple years, I've finally been able to break that cycle with the help of my therapist and the practice of EMDR. I've finally been able to break that cycle and understand things and really understand and break things down and reprocess these ideas and try to understand why I believed these lies that I shouldn't have, so that I don't go into the guilt and the shame and the blame about that. Because you can, when you're looking at these things and you're trying to understand, and you start to understand that, this guilt was never yours to bear. This burden was never yours to bear. Why did you pick it up? And even then, when you finally laid it down, why did you pick it back up? Because it was never yours to pick up in the first place. And when you start to think about that, if you don't watch out, you can get back into that blame. You can say, well, I did that because what an idiot I am. Why, I can't do anything. And you see, I've ruined my life because of this and because of that. And you can start down that road again. And when you start down that road again, it just makes things that much worse. And I feel like when you start down that road again, it makes everything louder and everything stronger. And those negative cognitions, they come in 10 times stronger. And in your mind, they say, see, I told you how terrible you are. I told you, and now you can see. Look what you did. But I challenge you today to try and, if you are having those negative cognitions, challenge them. Think of something that you've done recently that can challenge those negative beliefs about yourself. They're there. You just have to look. You just have to look for the goodness within yourself. We all have it. Sure, there are some parts that are in the shadows that, nobody's perfect. So there is some darkness to us, but there's also light. And there is so much good in so many people. Even when you think there's nothing good about you, there is. And we need to sit and we need to take a moment and we need to pause and think and reflect on what that goodness is, so that when our minds tell us, well, look what you did, shame on you, and just cover us with guilt and with shame that was never ours to bear in the first place, we can retaliate and we can say, wait a minute, this goodness is in me. I have this goodness in me. I have this light in me. So I don't believe you anymore. I don't believe you that I am such a terrible person because I have this goodness in me. Instead, I believe that maybe I did something bad. Maybe I made a bad decision. Maybe I didn't. The more you do this, the more your discernment will grow to where you can tell whether you made a bad decision and you need to recognize it and move on, or whether you were picking up guilt that was never yours to bear. And you can handle those things appropriately. We need to do these things, if we can, daily, but a couple times a week, once a week, something like that, whatever you have time for. But we need to make the time to just reflect, to just see what's going on in our minds. And if those negative cognitions are there. If you're beating yourself up and you're making yourself feel bad. You're making yourself feel guilty. You're making yourself feel the shame. You know it. You need to recognize it. It took me a long time before I understood that I needed to recognize it in my life. But when I did, and I was able to recognize that, then I was able to reprocess it. I was able to reflect. I was able to think about the situation and understand what was going on. It really helped my confidence. It really helped building my confidence back, and it really helped building my trust back in myself. And I'm not saying in any way that I'm there. I'm where I need to be. I'm not saying that I don't struggle with this every day. But what I am saying is the struggle's lighter. The struggle's not as heavy. Sometimes I get it, sometimes I don't. And that's okay. Because it's getting to the point where I get it more than I don't get it. And that's a win for me. And so I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for letting me share this story with you and the lessons that I've learned. And I hope in some way that something I said has helped you to feel seen, has helped you to understand that these things happen and you're not alone. That there are other people that are struggling too. And whatever you're going through, you do not have to suffer alone.